Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today, Stress-Free Bookkeeping for Small Businesses. My name is Cliff Turner. I'm one of the entrepreneur strategists here at ATB Financial, and I'm pleased to host the webinar for you today. I am based out of Edmonton, but I'm curious to know where everybody else is tuning in from. So if you could take a second and go into the chat, just put in the town, the city, the municipality, whatever it is, so that we can kind of get a lay of the land. Where are we all coming from? And while you're in there, feel free to put in a little bit about your business, what kind of business you have, what industry you're in. That way we know kind of not just where we are, but who we are as well. Speaking about where we are, I'd like to kick us off with a land acknowledgement to get things started. So here in Alberta, we're gathering on Treaties 6, 7, and 8 territory. Also, we acknowledge Treaties 4 and 10. Now, although the path to reconciliation is one that we all need to walk together, I think it's also important that we recognize that our individual journeys along this path are important as well. So personally, I feel the need to educate myself on this matter constantly. And one of the things that I realized a little while ago is that although I hear about these treaties frequently, like anytime there's an event like this or I watch a hockey game, I hear about these treaties, but I didn't actually know what was in them. And so I thought that might be something important to know. So I started looking into it for myself. Being in Edmonton, I am in Treaty 6 territory. So I found a website called treaty6.org. If you'd like to visit that, just spell the 6 out, treaty6.org. It has the original treaty there, as well as some explanation about what's in it. And I'd just like to read you a little summary that they have at the beginning of their website. So it says Treaty number 6 was entered into on August 23rd, 1876 at Fort Carleton and on September 9th, 1876 at Fort Pitt, with adhesions from 1877 to 1950. Treaty number 6 is an international treaty entered into with the Crown of Great Britain. Provisions in the treaty recognize the medical chest clause, famine and pestilence clause, as well as the rights to health, education, and other treaty and inherent rights. Treaty First Nations peoples have inherent rights which include but are not limited to the right to self-determination, which includes governance and establishing institutions, the right to jurisdiction and authority to enact laws, the right to protect and preserve their lands, resources, and water, the right to preserve their languages, practice their cultural customs and ceremonies, and the right to hunt, fish, trap, and gather. So my readings on this website and then some research beyond has really helped me to see that since that time, since the treaties were written, there's been a lot of misunderstandings and even disputes around the clauses in that treaty, as well, especially now, we have challenges on how do we interpret these treaties into modern situations. So I think it's important as individuals to be kind of familiar with the background and the intent of those treaties so that we can move forward together towards reconciliation. So again, the website that I visited was treaty6.org. If you're in one of the other treaty territories, I'm sure that there's similar ones, very easy to find. I'd really encourage you to do so. So with that being said, I'd like to introduce you to our speakers and our topic today. First of all, we have Chad Harding. He's a partner at SummitPath Bookkeeping. He's an experienced chartered accountant with a demonstrated history of working in a leadership capacity. He's skilled in financial reporting, tax preparation, sales tax, financial analysis, and generally accepted accounting principles, or GAAP. Along with Chad, we have Norelle Balaj. She's a director at SummitPath Bookkeeping. With almost 2 decades of experience in managing all aspects of accounting, Norelle harnesses her unique ability to dive deep and find creative solutions for her diverse clients. As the director of SummitPath Bookkeeping for the last 2 years, Norelle and her team have helped many business owners with their bookkeeping needs. Operating a small business can be overwhelming, especially when it comes to managing finances and record keeping. So Chad and Norelle are here to help us to boost our bookkeeping confidence and free us up to focus on our businesses rather than in the day-to-day details. We'll learn an overview of what bookkeeping is, how proper bookkeeping solves pain points for small businesses, and additional tips and tricks to manage our bookkeeping. And before we get started, just a quick note for everyone that's tuning in. If you have any questions, feel free to put those in the chat at any time during the webinar, and we'll address those at the end. Following today's presentation, you'll receive a follow-up email within a couple of days, and that will contain information on how to access the recording of this webinar, as well as some other materials that'll be handy for you. So thank you, Chad and Norelle, for sharing your time with us today. I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Cliff. I really appreciate that warm introduction and that great commentary about the Treaty 6 lands. That was excellent. Welcome everyone. Thanks for taking the time to attend this little webinar that we're putting on with ATB. Thank you, Cliff, Carrie, Laura, for allowing us to come in and obviously speak to some very important people from their establishment. We've got a lot of businesses here. It looks like we've got people from Hinton, Calgary, Edmonton, Red Deer, kind of all over Alberta, which is great to see. As Cliff mentioned, my name is Chad Harding. I am a partner at SummitPath Charter Professional Accountants. I've been an accountant for about 10 years now. And in the last couple of years, we've actually expanded into a bookkeeping company. The reason we really started to do that endeavor in the first place, just like a lot of yourselves being entrepreneurs and starting your own businesses, and we saw a need in the marketplace, especially as a chartered accountant, seeing a lot of year ends, tax returns, and seeing the struggles of small businesses. We really saw that there was a huge gap when it comes to how small businesses, medium businesses, well-established businesses, they always kind of end up running into the same struggle, which is how do they get their records in order? So today we're going to do, like Cliff introduced, we're going to do a little presentation here. I'm hoping to keep it pretty relaxed and kind of go through really the importance of what we're doing. So, or importance of what bookkeeping is, so to speak. So I'm just going to get going. If you have any questions, comments, please feel free to add them to the chat. The team will be flagging them, and we've got an area at the end where we can have those questions, go through them, and whatnot. So, okay. So today, what we are going to do is start with the basics. What is bookkeeping? We're going to talk about why it's important. Hopefully have a little quick conversation about some of your struggles. If you're having struggles, maybe you're not. And then hopefully give you kind of some solutions to help those struggles. And then we'll have a little question period at the end. Okay. So first off, what is bookkeeping? So if you don't mind, I'm going to get everybody just to, you've got the chat window open there. Just take a minute and maybe just kind of write what bookkeeping is to you. I'll give you a minute to kind of just type some answers there, and then we'll go through them. Keeping track of revenue expenses, that's a great one. Keeping financial records, that's great as well. Yeah, financial records is huge, absolutely. Keeping track of expenses, yeah. Posting receipts, that's an excellent one. Thank you, Mike. Serge, yeah. Transactions, yeah. Finances, right? It all kind of leads into the same kind of area. So, well, now they're really coming in here. So, incoming and outgoing purchases and taxes. Taxes a good. I mean, you're talking my language. I'm in the accounting world, so taxes is my day-to-day stuff. And cash flow. No, that's great answers. Thanks for everybody for participating. If you wanted to look up the definition, bookkeeping is basically a skill or occupation of systematically recording financial transactions on a regular basis. I like to add that on a regular basis piece because in my field, we see it all the time where people fall behind, right? So we've got lots of stuff, right? We've got ledgers, we've got expenses, we've got revenues, and we're going to go through this in a minute. But, why do we really care, right? It's great to have this and it's great to record these transactions, but why do we care about recording them in a specific way? And why should we do it on a regular basis? Okay. So, and that's where we're going to go to next. Why is it important? I speak with a lot of people, a lot of clients regarding their finances. And the truth is, there's a lot of stuff going on as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, right? Every day you could have hundreds of different transactions, right? A lot of them tie into three different kind of major cycles. You've got your revenues and receivables, your payables and expenses, and payroll, right? But if you think about that, and if you think about all the transactions going on in your business, it can be all overwhelming, right? Like you've got, you're invoicing the revenue, you're doing the work, or you're selling, aesthetics or retail supplies, right? We've got, I think I saw an electrical contractor in there. You're going to be out there, installing a switch box, and you need to invoice for that, right? So that's a piece of bookkeeping, getting the invoices done. You have a bank account, and in that bank account, you're going to have all of the deposits, all of the expenses coming in and out of that bank account, right? That's transactions that we've got to try and keep an eye on. How do we know we're getting the right money from the right people? Kind of ties into cash flow. We've got bills to pay. We've got debt payments. I mean, if you're an entrepreneur, you probably already know the whole issue. Getting started is, sometimes it's a struggle. Sometimes there's capital investments. Sometimes you have to take on a loan. So you can have expenses, but you can also have payments on your debt, right? So we got to track that. You got your credit card, right? Who doesn't want to use your credit card to get the points? Well, we got to make sure that we're tracking all the transactions there. I mean, I do this a lot. I think somebody said there, keep an eye on your categorizing your receipts and expenses. If I'm going to go out for lunch one day, taking a potential client, well, I've got a receipt. I gotta categorize that, right? Let alone the people. We've got people every single day. We've got payroll that we got to deal with. Maybe those same individuals, they need advances, right? You could be paying halfway through the month and then also at the end of the month, which is kind of like an advance. But along with that, we've got our source deductions, we've got our employee remittances, we got to make sure that they're getting their RSP contributions if you're doing something like that. As well as, how are you going to grow your business, right? I think I saw a geology contractor out there, right? You need tools for geology. I mean, in the one geologist that I work with, he has to get a couple different seismic readers, right? So how does he know when to record or purchase a new one, right? So that he can expand his business, right? So all of those transactions, they all build up, right? So if we've got our bank, we've got our receivables, we've got our debt payments, we've got our payables and bills, we've got our receipts from the lunch that's sitting in my wallet, we've got payroll to deal with. That is a lot of volume, right? So the reason why bookkeeping is important is because it takes that and it, puts some like organization to the chaos, right? We want to take all those transactions. We want to classify the revenue and receivables. We want to take those expenses and say, yeah, that's meals and entertainment, and that's office expense, right? We want to see what our bills are, what our payroll is, and make sure that those items are actually getting paid when they're supposed to, right? So bookkeeping is that aspect, right? You've got all these transactions from all these different sources. Well, let's get this into a nice, easy fit, okay? And that's great, right? So, okay, the next question, of course, would be, well, why, right? I don't necessarily need to do that. I could just, put it in a shoebox and give it to my accountant, and he'll sort through it. And the truth is that this is where that on a regular basis comes out, right? Because if we are working on the daily, on a weekly basis, say a monthly basis, whatever kind of fits your organization, what we're doing is organizing our records, okay? Getting things organized is the key piece of the puzzle, right? You know that old saying, garbage in, garbage out? Well, bookkeeping is a really good example of that. Got all these transactions, but if they're not categorized in the right way and they're all over the place, well, it's not really organized. And that creates a problem, right? So if we're not doing it regularly, if we're not organizing it, what's going to happen is we don't have any certainty on our current financial situation, right? I mean, there's our gut reaction, of course, so I shouldn't say any certainty, but we're already dealing with a lot of uncertainties in our daily business, right? Where's that next client going to come from? How are we going to handle inflation, right? What happens if, inflation increases, my bank loan is a floating rate interest rate and it's going to go up, so my payments are going to go up, right? How are we going to deal with the people issues that we have? I've got a big project, but I don't have the people. Do I need to hire? Can I hire? And the truth is that just organizing your records starts to create a little bit more clarity around it, which helps you create better financial information, right? So and talk about better financial information, there's a lot of things that we could say what that is, right? Your shoebox with all your receipts and stuff, there's financial information in there, but it's not really organized. So when I talk about financial information, I really try and think about, well, because I'm an accountant, I think about the balance sheet and the profit and loss, right? Now, both of those items, I'm sure everybody here has probably heard of them in one time or another, even if we don't necessarily understand the purpose. A profit and loss, pretty easy to understand because we can equate it to our own lives, right? It's that I'm working for a living, I get my paycheck, I got to pay my mortgage. That's my profit and loss, so to speak, right? My mortgage, my food, those are expenses. My employment salary in a regular job would be my income. So we have a pretty good understanding of that. Balance sheet's a little bit different because it kind of creates that snapshot in time of the financial health. So what it really does is it's like, what is your cash at a certain time? How much money do people owe you? How much inventory are you carrying? Who do you owe? What's the level of your debt? And if those two statements, which we see in accounting all the time, aren't in a good state, they're not organized, stuff is in the wrong places, things aren't categorized right or not categorized at all, well, now they don't have a lot of reliability. So when we talk about creating better financial information, that's a huge piece of the puzzle, because that information allows us to kind of see trends, see differences, right? So, a good example of this would be, if we look at your financial information and you're recording all of your transactions every single month, well, we can start to see how revenue changes, right? Maybe you're, I'm gonna use the pet care. I think somebody here is from pet care. I have a dog, so I really lean into that anyways. But let's just say you have, I'm gonna pretend it's a doggy daycare, and your revenues are pretty consistent, but then they drop off in July and August. It's probably because the pet owners are going away on vacation. They're taking their pet with them, but you're going to start to see trends, right? So now we can use that better information to do the next thing, which is the most important thing, which is make informed decisions. Okay, if your financial information is utter chaos, you can't really use that to make decisions. And this is probably the quintessential reason why we got involved in trying to provide bookkeeping services, because we want people to make informed decisions, because informed decisions allows you to kind of move forward, right? You may have our name isn't coincident. We try to, we want to see all of the people that we talk to reach their end game. What's their path? Where are they going to go? And if you don't have the information to make good decisions, well, you're just making decisions based on, I don't know, which way the wind is blowing, your gut feeling, and that's not the way you really want to run your business. So if we kind of look at it as a whole, if you don't have that bookkeeping piece, well, the information's not going to be organized. You're not going to have good financial information, and then you might be making decisions based on the wrong information, right? A couple really good examples of this that I was thinking about is, let's say you're really busy. You had a really busy a month in the aesthetics world. Maybe it's Christmas and everybody's is buying the retail products. All right, I don't know exactly what you do in aesthetics, but Christmas is a really busy season, and you have all this income, but they're maybe it's a wholesaler, so they're buying a lot of product at one time, and you're like, man, I come out of January, like, man, I had such a great month, and you look at your bank account, you're like, man, I only got $2,000, but I sold $100,000 of product, right? Well, how do you know why? What's the reason for that? And your better financial information allows you to say, okay, well, ABC wholesaler or retailer bought $100,000 and they haven't paid, and they pay typically in 60 days. So I know where my money is right now. So how do I collect that? Is there anything I can do on that front, right? Another good example is, if you have good financial information, what happens if your revenue has been slowly dropping 10% every single month? You just can't figure out why. Well, if you don't have that information and you're not looking at your financials regularly, well, you can't do anything about it. But if you're actually seeing that 10% drop, maybe it's cueing you to do something different, right? So for example, maybe you need to like increase your marketing plan. You're coming into the summer and Stampede in Calgary. I'm in Calgary, but maybe Stampede's ahead. So you're like, okay, how can I get in front of more clients? Well, maybe I do a Stampede breakfast, and it's like, hey, I up my advertising budget, and then all of a sudden we're going to see more clients, and hopefully you can see 3 months down the road that turned into revenue, right? So your better financial information is going to paint a picture which you're going to be able to utilize. Okay. There's a lot of reasons for better bookkeeping. I think that one is the primary one. But here's a couple others. There's some financial benefits. Obviously, we just spoke about financial accuracy, financial management analysis, comparing to your budget, right? An easy technique is if you've got good financial records for an entire year on a monthly basis, well, you can use that to kind of create a budget for the next year. And then you can start assessing, well, how come this year we are lower than last year? Or, man, that marketing campaign we put through in January has really paid off because we've got a big upswing in our new clients onboarding in April, which is great. That's a huge piece of it. Maybe your IT expenses are eating up 25% of your gross profit. Well, is that standard for the industry? Maybe not. Maybe you need to look at some other vendors, other suppliers to see if you can get something better, right? Risk mitigation. I'm going to talk about this one in a little bit later with an example, but 100% seeing your financial records does mitigate some of your risk. I'll give you an example in a bit. Detection of financial irregularities. This is kind of on that same pathway as well. Tax compliance. I mean, now we're talking my language, right? Tax compliance is a big piece. If you're kind of getting to the end of a year and you don't know how much you made, how much your expenses were, what your net income was, how do you know how much you're going to owe, right? That isn't just, say, your corporate income tax or personal income tax, so to speak, but it could be GST, right? Your GST reporting. One of the things I do this all the time, but I'm always looking at our records and saying, okay, we're sitting at X net income. I know off the top of my head, well, the tax rate's about 11%. I can start budgeting for that tax bill that's going to come down at the end of the year, or make installments, right? Another good one here, I really appreciate this one, is the credibility with investors and lenders. Obviously, you all bank with ATB. If you needed to get a startup loan, well, they're going to request financial statements, right? Could be compilation engagement financial statements or review engagement financial statements, but they want to know how good the company is going because they want to be able to say, yeah, they're going to be able to repay this loan, right? So if you need to buy that extra asset purchase, that extra asset to expand your business, maybe they're more likely to give you financing, especially if you have to do reporting on a monthly or quarterly basis throughout the year. And that's a big piece of the puzzle, right? Because if you have your shoebox, give it to your accountant, and all of a sudden the income isn't what you thought it was, I mean, that can be a tough conversation. I've had to be involved in some of those tough conversations. But if you're consistent and you know what your records are, it's a lot easier to be upfront. I always like to say that your bank is your biggest vendor, right? It's your biggest supplier, biggest supporter of your business. So making sure that you're having that good communication and making sure there's no unexplained or unexpected changes right at the end, that's a big bonus in my experience. Okay. Moving on to the non-financial benefits. These are 4 pretty easy ones, right? Stress relief, right? And that kind of goes in the comfort and confidence one. You know what your numbers are. If you know what your net income is or what your net loss is, you know what you got to do, or you got to start thinking of ideas of what to do, right? But that's a lot better than not knowing anything, or not knowing, you've got this range and you think you're somewhere in there, as opposed to saying, no, I'm right here. I know where we are. I know what my tax situation is, etc. Again, that feeds into that doing the bookkeeping regularly. Time management and work-life balance, I think those two kind of go together as well, right? Time management's an interesting one because we've got aesthetics, pet care, there was retail, I think, in here, custom software design, geology, electrical contractor, or just some of the few industries you're all working in, you're all in those industries, right? And I would expect you probably are going to make more money doing that than bookkeeping, right? So how do you manage that time piece? Well, you want to make sure that you have that work-life balance, because you didn't get into this job to basically buy yourself a job, right? There's a good book that talks about that, the E-Myth, and it is all about that, right? You start an entrepreneur, you've created yourself a job. How do you pull yourself out of that situation, right? So next up, what I want to do, so I hope that kind of gave you a pretty good overview of why I think bookkeeping is really important. What I want to do now is just kind of ask you, right? You're all entrepreneurs or small business owners, maybe, startups. Maybe you're really established. I think there's a few people that are in there that are pretty established, but everybody struggles in different ways with bookkeeping. So I just kind of want to see what some of your struggles were with bookkeeping. So if you don't mind, just add a few in the chat there, and we'll take a quick look. Yep, boring. Absolutely. I mean, I don't think so, but yeah, that's a good answer. Yeah, it's difficult to keep track of everything. A lot of systems going on. Absolutely. Yeah, I think, Crystal, that's a really good example, right? There's a lot of options for software. We're going to talk about that. Addison, thank you. We're going to talk about that in a minute. Knowing how to categorize receipts, I see that a couple times. Yeah, managing receipts. Oh man, if you could see my wallet right now, you'd see the little stack of papers. I think that's a good one. Time. Oh, Vincent, an interesting one. American software doesn't seem to support Canadian regulatory tax system. That's a good comment. That is very true. Making it efficient, 100%. Yeah. No, those are some great answers. Great answers. Thank you all for participating. Typically in our line of work, we see, in talking with different clients, these are some of the ones that we see quite often. First one, it was mentioned there below. Sorry, my screen freeze. There we go. No time, right? Business owners don't have a lot of hats. They have a lot of responsibilities. Prioritizing bookkeeping, it's got to probably rank below. There's probably manage my revenue, get new customers, do the marketing, handle the people, get the payroll done. And then even if you're done all of those business expenses, it's like, well, I'd rather spend time with my family or go enjoy myself or have a little bit of leisure time. Bookkeeping's way down here, right? It's not a high priority in a lot of people's businesses, no question about it, right? Complexity, I think we kind of talked about that in some of your ideas there. Bookkeeping's complex, right? And you didn't go to school necessarily to be a bookkeeper, right? You wanted to be an electrician, or you wanted to, be a geologist. So if you asked me right now to say, hey, come on down and do geology, we're like, no, I don't know how to do that. How do I get somebody to do that for me? It's stressful. I did see that in the list there. It is stressful, right? It can be that thing that you don't want to do, which snowballs into, I don't know what I need to do, and I haven't done it for a while, and that snowball running downhill can turn into a pretty big, well, I don't know what a big snowman, avalanche. There we go. Right? Lack of consistency and no routine. It's tough to get into a really good system to deal with this. I think this is a really interesting one, right? It's not what you wanted to do. You didn't start your business to become a bookkeeper. You started your business to do something else. Don't understand the process. It can be expensive. Don't see the benefit. And you got better things to do with your time, right? So those are some typical struggles that we see along the way. So what can we do to simplify your bookkeeping, right? Or not we, but you, what can be done? Here's some solutions that we come across. We recommend that can create just little efficiencies, right? The first one, a bookkeeping software. I think Vincent mentioned about the American versus Canadian regulations. Absolutely. And I think there was another one is, which software is the right one, right? And that's very true. There's a lot of options out there. QuickBooks Desktop, QuickBooks Online, Sage Desktop, Sage Online, Xero, which is an online platform from Australia, oddly enough. Wave is, I believe, created in Canada as well, but there's a lot of options, right? And how do you pick? And the truth is, I can't say, hey, one of these is better than their other. They're never better. They always have pros. They always have cons. They always have costs around them. Okay. Things you want to consider: are they cloud-based? Right? Can you do your bookkeeping on the train because you got an hour to burn, or in the bus, or on the bus, or that's a really good question. Can you link your bank accounts to it? This is a pretty big change over the last 5 years, but there should be no reason we're manually entering data from your bank and credit cards anymore, right? So you need a software that can manage that. If it doesn't, honestly, in my perspective, it's not a good fit. Does it store your receipts? I know we were talking about receipts in a second. Can you do that? Does it integrate easily with any of your other apps, right? Maybe you receive funds using Pluto, or you pay your bills using Pluto, and you've got Payworks for your payroll. Does that software integrate? How many people can use it? All good questions. I don't want to lead anybody into a direct one, but I will tell you this because this is my field. I've used every software under the sun. I've used all 4 of the ones you're seeing right now. I've used the desktop versions of Sage and QuickBooks Online. In my experience right now, and this isn't a plug because I work with them all right now as well. In my experience, QuickBooks Online has probably put the most resources into developing their online portal. So if you don't have one, I would recommend probably starting there as an opportunity. Okay. Receipt capture. If you can get your books and records put onto an accounting system, that's going to smooth out your time quite a bit. But what do you do with all the information? And I know there was a couple of you, that mentioned receipts. Well, I bet there's still tons of people out there that have the receipts chucked into a box. And the truth is, we don't need to do that anymore, right? The world has changed. We've got way more digital opportunities than we've ever had before. And I would say there's a lot of opportunities to scan and snap and record those. Here's just a few options. QuickBooks Online has its own snap and sort message. That's actually what I use for my own business. Every once in a while, I just take all the receipts out of my wallet, take little pictures of them. It automatically uploads, and then I can categorize those expenses to the bank transactions that are already linked for me. Okay. Dext is another option. It used to be called Receipt Bank, but it does categorize those, and Expensify is another one. So same thing, taking those items and transferring them into a digital world. This can be really beneficial when I just did notice a question here about CRA accept digital scans. Honestly, a lot of this is my field as well. I mean, as an accountant, I do a lot of CRA reviews. I mostly send digital copies in now to CRA when they're auditing something. I have never had, in the last couple of years, I haven't had anything pushed back. I'll be honest, I don't know that it's a regulatory requirement to keep paper. I don't think there could be, but they haven't really given any actual legislation to say, no, it has to be paper. They won't accept digital anymore. All of the CRA reviews I send right now, they are PDF copies of everything that I've got. So, and in the last year, there's been an uptick of those. So I have actually been able to, most of the reviews I've sent in that have been approved, it wasn't because they were digital or rejected. It was because they didn't meet the qualification of whatever that expense was. So this is a really good option. Payroll. Payroll is probably one of the most complex and high risk areas that you can have as a business owner. And that is because the penalties, right? If you mess up your payroll, The penalties on like the source deductions that are going to CRA or the employee remittances going to CRA that are a responsibility of the business, the penalties on those are significant. So getting it right the first time is a huge piece. There's a lot of options there. If you hate doing it, you can't always remove yourself completely, but if you can get the logistics handled, how does it get paid? It gets paid by somebody else. They take it from your account. All you got to do is enter maybe the employee hours and whatnot, or pay increases or new hire. Well, it significantly minimizes your workload and reduces that stress piece, right? If you can do that, I mean, payroll is probably the biggest thing that I would kind of think about if you don't like doing it. Okay. Things to consider when you're kind of looking at a payroll provider. Where are they storing the information? What's their audit protocol? Do they have a method of like tracking what's happening? If you have an internal staff handling it, who's got approvals for approving payroll versus preparing payroll? That's a big piece of the puzzle. We're going to talk about that in another second here. Making sure that the cost of that service, overweighs the value. Okay, that's a huge one. Okay. Next up, this is an interesting one. If I put on my year-end accountant hat, this is an area where a lot of people struggle, right? I like to say when I talk to people, if you want to simplify your year-end accounting and hopefully reduce your fees, the biggest thing you can do through just a little diligence is separate your personal from your business, right? Separate the church and state, I like to say. Whether you're a sole proprietor or a corporation, sole proprietor would be the little image on the left, right? Because everything is just on your personal income tax return. If you're a sole proprietor, I recommend don't have your revenues coming into your personal bank account because it gets muddy, right? You can't necessarily always track when you're doing your personal tax return. What was the business income? What was the business expenses? Open up an extra bank account and have it going into there. Okay. If you're a corporation, which would be that picture in the middle, a little bit easier, but you'd be surprised how many people end up paying for their Netflix on their corporate credit card, or they put on that trip to Hawaii on their corporate credit card, and there's no business purpose to it whatsoever. It was literally a vacation with the kids or something. It happens. And for every one of those transactions going back and forth, it's just a little bit more to reconcile. So if you can separate them right off the bat, it removes that issue completely. So I recommend doing that. That's an easy solve that anybody can do. Okay. When it comes to the keeping things regular on time, create yourself a checklist, right? What are you going to do this week, right? Maybe it's taking an hour or two at the end of a week and just categorizing your bank transactions, right? That makes a world of difference when we get to the end of the year. What do we need to do at the end of the month? Do we need to reconcile our bank account? Do we need to double check our AR? Do we need to check our payables and see where we're sitting on those? How's the cash looking? Do we take a look at our monthly balance sheets and our monthly profit and loss to say, okay, revenue isn't what I expected. It should be higher. Why is that? And then have some kind of control process to make sure that those things get done. You can create an Excel that says, okay, these are my weekly tasks, my monthly tasks, my annual tasks. Have I done them? Have I closed them off? A checklist can kind of help you just kind of stay on track. We use that quite a bit in our own business, just making sure we've got a process. Okay. Controls. I'm not going to talk a ton about this, but you're all business owners, and this is a big deal. I'll try to kind of brief over this, and you can read the slide at your leisure. I don't want to go over, but control processes are really important. There's three kinds: preventative, detective, and corrective. Preventative controls, a really good example of this is it's preventing something from going wrong when that shouldn't, right? Easy example is you buy a new vehicle and it gets put into vehicle expense instead of, say, an asset schedule, right? Or I would probably say the more important one is, restricting bank access and segregation of duties, right? I kind of hinted this at in the payroll slide, but who's preparing payroll and who's approving payroll? Now, if the person preparing it is also able to approve it and they're not the business owner, well, you've got a real problem there, right? Because they could potentially prepare an extra $1,000 to themselves and approve that $1,000 to themselves. And if you're not looking at your financials and you haven't kind of had that bookkeeping kind of recorded, you're maybe never going to see it. Okay. Same idea, detective controls. This is kind of like doing those checklists, account reconciliations, review and approval of how to, like, who's preparing the financials. Did they go to the owner? Owner looks at them and says, yep, these are good. Or, hey, this is the AP. Who do you want to pay? The owner says, yep, pay these people, please. And then goes to the bank. They, create the accountant on hand. He creates the bank transaction. It gets approved by the owner. Those are huge pieces of the puzzle. And then corrective controls. That's kind of finding things afterwards and trying to fix them. Okay. Obviously, the preventative and detective, those are where we want to stay the majority of our time, figuring out those processes and really trying to fix them up. I will say a quick story on this and how important this is if you don't have a process. Over the last year and a half, I'd say our company has worked with a couple clients that have been stolen from to the excess of $500,000 each. Basically by that payroll example that I just said. So if you don't have a good system and you don't have those checks and balances, you are exposed, right? And if you're not looking at your financials regularly enough, you might not even notice it happened. Okay. So this is a really interesting slide to kind of ponder and try and think about. Next one, hire a professional. We do this in our own business, maybe not on the bookkeeping and accounting side, but I read a really great book. It's called Who Not How, and I kind of put a little quote in there because it flipped my perspective on procrastination. Procrastination is wisdom if you listen to it. Again, Who Not How by Dan Sullivan. And it was really interesting. If it's something you really hate doing and you never want to do it, why would you do it, right? I kind of chalk this up to the whole, your time is valuable, right? If you can earn $300 for an hour of work, in the electrical field as an electrical contractor, and you can spend an hour bookkeeping, which one makes more sense, right? Especially if, let's say, that bookkeeping costs you $100 for that hour and it only takes the few. Well, now you've basically maximized that hour and generated an extra $200, plus you've relieved the stress, you've relieved your time, and now you can go enjoy your more leisure time. So there is that kind of question. I like to say, don't think about bookkeeping as an expense. If you hated doing it so much, think about it as an investment. It's an investment in your stress levels, your work-life balance. It's an investment in your knowledge to make sure things are done right. So that's my last one there. Now I wanted to open it up for some questions. I think we've got about 10-15 minutes here. So I saw a couple questions have been kind of going through here. But please, ask away.
Perfect. Yeah, we've got a few, and do continue to put those questions into the chat there, and we'll jump into them here. But one that I just wanted to thank you for such great information. I love that you referenced the E-Myth and Who Not How, because I think that's incredibly important for entrepreneurs to know when to delegate, when to outsource, because it can really snowball on a person without taking control of that. So we just had a question come through from Sarah. She just started her business, and she's wondering, when is it proper to start working with a bookkeeper?
Yeah, I mean, that's the tricky question, right? When you're starting a business, I mean, cash flow is the biggest question mark, right? How are you going to pay for the expenses, right? And Sarah, do you mind just chatting? What line of business are you in there? Might take a little lag, but the general thing is there's always a lag, right? If I'm working, I'm going to pretend you're in retail sales there, Sarah. Oh, wellness sector. Cool. Okay, wellness. Great. So if you're in the wellness sector, you're starting your own business. I'm going to pretend you're a chiropractor. Okay. Well, you need space to be a chiropractor. So now you've got a lease. You've got these expenses that are coming out of your bank account, and you haven't even got any clients yet. So when you're a startup, that's kind of the piece of the puzzle. Now, I don't know that there's any entrepreneur that doesn't start doing their own bookkeeping, to be fair. I think the question becomes, when does it get to be too much? and when can you afford to make that investment? There's no silver bullet answer to this one, I'm afraid. You got to start somewhere. I have a lot of startup entrepreneurs that they just started with QuickBooks Online, to be fair. And all they do is they try it themselves. They create rules so that they don't have to worry about the bank charges. And, there's a lot of webinars out there that you can get, webinars or YouTube videos on, and actually QuickBooks Online, for example, and I'm picking on QuickBooks Online because I'm most familiar with it. But there's a lot of training videos on how to. So if you're starting up and you don't have any system, start there. See if you can work through it. I mean, in general, your basic structure is if it's a deposit, it's probably revenue, and if it's an outflow, it's probably expenses. And just try and start categorizing it. There's a couple things that we can do to kind of help you along in that regard. Setting up a chart of accounts. This is getting into a little bit more accounting knowledge, but getting that set up so that you can see the potential accounts. A lot of them don't have a full listing, so they'll just have office or rent. But maybe you need meals and utilities and the whole kind of gambit. So you don't have to think quite so much. You can be like, okay, what is that? Well, that's insurance. Plug it to insurance and move on. So.
That's awesome. We also had a question come in from George here, just kind of asking, what's the general difference between an accountant and a bookkeeper, and how should you engage each?
Yeah, that's a great question. You could kind of look at that a couple ways. So one of them would be, say, maybe your internal accountant versus an external accountant, right? Somebody who's, say, in public practice like I am. An external accountant in public practice, we kind of handle more of the high level conversations, tax planning, filing your tax return, creating your year-end financial statements, T-slip preparation, so T4s, T5s, and personal income taxes. So from that standpoint, I'm kind of outside of that. You can get different levels of skill quality when it comes to bookkeeping and accounting internally. So I would call that the private industry, private sector. A bookkeeper can categorize transactions and a controller can categorize transactions. It's kind of the same thing. But if you typically get a designated individual, they're probably going to be a controller to a company. Really, there's a pretty big range in fees you're going to pay, a bookkeeper versus a controller. So that's probably the main difference from an internal standpoint. Yeah.
Right along those lines, Sarah actually had another question that I know it's probably very, very different across the board when you're dealing with different industries and different sizes of businesses. But how much should a person expect to be investing in a bookkeeper?
Also a tough question, right? The reason we started SummitPath Bookkeeping was because we saw a real gap in the marketplace. There's a lot of bookkeepers out there. The question is, can you find the right one for the right cost? And that is really hard. You can get the best bookkeeper in the world for $30 an hour. You can get the worst one for $100 an hour. It could be $200 an hour. You really have to just be careful on that. I think in general, we kind of do more like a monthly subscription model for our bookkeeping services. But I mean, you're probably if you're doing it right and having the right person to categorize stuff, even on simple business, you're probably spending $250 to $350 a month to do it right. Now, that would probably add up to, call it $3,000 to $4,000 a year. Again, a year-end accountant, they're charging a lot more. So if you leave your bookkeeping for the end of the year, well, that $100 an hour all of a sudden turns $350 an hour because a year-end accountant is quite a bit more expensive to do bookkeeping. So something to think about.
Yeah, like the old saying there of the shoebox being dropped off with the accountants in the last.
Yeah, I mean, we hate it, but it's hard not to love it because it means it's gonna take a lot more time, and it's billings in our industry, to be fair, right? I mean, I don't love it. Our industry in general would.
Right on. Yeah, you're kind of a segue machine here. Every answer or question that you answer seems to lead to the next question that's popping up on the chat here. But Jimmy kind of asks, well, how do you find the right bookkeeper for your business? So if we took price out of it, is there other things that we should be looking at?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that the biggest thing you got to think about it, and it's not the easiest thing to discern, do you get along with the person that's your bookkeeper, right? I mean, I think in this day and age, you have to really think about who do you want to be working with. If you're a really detail oriented person and you hire somebody who is a little bit more on the edges or on the fringe of that, I mean, it's going to drive you crazy, right? So think about who's going to drive. I think that's number one. Number two is, do they have the expertise? Do they have a support system if they don't know the answer? Because to be fair, you may not know the answer. Right? A lot of it, there's still always a process, a back and forth between the owner and the bookkeeper. I never want to give the impression that, oh, I got a bookkeeper and now I don't have to do anything, because that's just not the reality of it. A bookkeeper has to understand your business, and the only person that really understands your business is you, and that knowledge transfer takes time. So, I mean, I think you got to think about fees. You got to think about, do you get along with them? Do they have a system? I mean, we've got people here, I think, in the group. I mean, geology, I'm guessing you're probably not just working in Calgary or Edmonton. You're probably, you might be out in Drumheller, or you might be up in Grand Prairie or Fort Mac and that doing your services. So can they work remotely? That's a pretty good question to answer. Do they need to sit on a desk? What softwares do they use? You kind of have to ask those questions and kind of see how do you get along with the person? What are their responses, and kind of, what suits your needs, right?
That's great. That actually makes me think of my stepdad a little bit. He was an accountant and a tax consultant back in the 80s and 90s is when I kind of clued into what he was doing. And his saying was he liked to take CRA's rules and just see how far they'd bend, and then just get to that point. But he knew his clientele needed to be on board with that. Like they had to have that same risk tolerance as him, or it would just be rough for both, right?
That's very similar to me, except I have a conversation. My typical conversation is, what's your risk profile? Because it doesn't bother me. You want to try it? Go ahead, but I'm telling you, that's probably not going to work. But yeah, absolutely.
That's great. Laura put in the chat there a link to our atbentrepreneur.com, and we actually have an article in there where Norelle shared a lot of her knowledge. And I'll put you on the spot here a little bit, Norelle, if that's okay. Is there a couple of nuggets from that article or other nuggets that you'd like to share with the crowd here?
I think Chad covered mostly everything. We did talk there, same thing about, the bookkeeper versus an accountant is there. And also we chatted about, just what to look for when you're hiring a bookkeeper. But essentially we talked just about the best practices and being proactive in your approach. So making sure you do things ahead of time so you're not scrambling at year end, trying to get that shoebox of receipts and off to your, accountant and incurring possibly interest and penalties. So I think if you take some of the tips that Chad had in this presentation along with the blog, that would definitely put you on the right path moving forward. But I do see that there's a question from George, Chad, there, just on how granular the software can be.
George, sorry, Cliff, do you mind if I'll just read this out here? Do
bookkeeping
software get granular on expenses, or can we create the specific items, for instance, limited to just raw materials, or break it down fabric, batting thread? Cool. So I always like to look at it as, what's the picture you want to see, right? When we break down, our standard, when we break down things, we typically use a main group and subgroups. So for example, you're talking more or less your cost of sales, right? And I believe it was quilting, a quilt company. If you look at it like that, if you want to see your cost of sales, the question is, what's going to add value? Now, at the end of the year, maybe you just need to see the total cost of sales divided by total revenue, right? So you can figure out your gross profit. But on a granular scale, you may want to know what's thread and batting and fabric. Maybe you want to see those different. So I would probably typically organize that as cost of sales, materials, and then have subcategories so you can break it down. That is really up to you. We typically try and have that breakdown so we can see a high level and dig in if we want to. For another really good example of that would be, say, like we have a lot of computer expenses in our industry, right? So I have software or IT managed services, I got licenses, let alone just like the other computer subscriptions. So when I look at the year on a whole, I just want to see computer. What did it do in comparison to my budget? But maybe it kind of looks odd. So I want to dig in and like, well, our managed services went up or our licensing went up. Then I can easily break those down or compress them at my discretion.
Right on. This isn't a question from the chat, but just something that I was thinking actually. How much or how often, I guess, would you recommend that an entrepreneur sit down with their bookkeeper and or accountant and just kind of get a review of what's going on to keep their finger on the pulse?
Yeah, that's a great question there, Cliff. I think the big piece of it is, I mean, the better the information, we talk a lot about reliability and like the reliability and relevance and reliability, right? Is the information good and how recent is it, right? So the more often you're looking at these things, the more often it's getting updated, the better your information is to make the decisions. So, I mean, typically in bookkeeping, I'd probably say if you're not looking at your financials, like if you're doing the bookkeeping, you're not looking at your financials every month, you're missing a control process to make sure things are going right, right? So I think monthly would probably be the minimum that I would suggest, even if you're doing your own bookkeeping. Like, do the bookkeeping, then pull yourself out and say, okay, what does this mean? What does this look like? That would be at least a minimum thing. Speaking with your year-end accountant, that really depends. I typically, because you don't want to pay for just like a quick discussion that maybe you don't need, but it's helpful, right? If you're trying to plan your tax installments or trying to figure out how much you owe, you might have to. If you have a well-established business with lots of transactions and you're trying to do some, growth strategies, probably, talk to your accountant before you buy that big piece of equipment to see, what do they think? What do they think on the cash flow? Will they be able to assess? Will you be able to use that debt appropriately, or we just caught with the interest is going to kill you or something like that? But if you're just ticking along and doing your thing, you probably don't need to have too many conversations until you get to your year end and maybe the tax planning for your personal income taxes, right? That's probably the two kind of big pieces in a year. But the more complex, the more often you probably are going to talk. That's typically how it happens.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for that. There's so much great information there. I think it'll give a lot of people a great jumping off point to dig in a little bit deeper. And I love that you've kind of shown how it's so important to keep on top of the bookkeeping so that you have that efficiency, you have that reporting so you can make database decisions. Incredibly important and powerful if somebody stays on top of it. So
that's great. Thank you, Cliff. I appreciate that.
Right on. So yeah, thank you guys both for being here today. My colleague Laura, she's going to post a link into the chat here pretty quick, which will have our feedback survey in it. Really ask if you could take a moment to do that before you leave today. We really like to know what people think about these webinars so that we can always continue to improve what we deliver. And remember to keep an eye out for that email that you'll be getting in the next day or two. The recording of this webinar will be there along with some other follow-up materials that'll be handy for you. And just to put a plug out there, if you're in Edmonton or Calgary, or you feel like traveling a little bit, if you happen to be in a rural setting, we'd love to have you join us for one of our Clues for a Cause, the Entrepreneur Holiday Edition. This is going to happen in Edmonton on December 6th and in Calgary on December 12th. It's really kind of cool. I'm going to be there. I'm very excited about it for the one in Edmonton, but it's a one-of-a-kind kind of networking and fundraising event that combines the holiday spirit with the excitement of an interactive scavenger hunt. So we'll be kind of traipsing about downtown and figuring out some clues. It's going to be a lot of fun. But registrations for that will be in that email that you'll get after this webinar. But another way that you can find out about that and all of our upcoming webinars and subscribe to our newsletter if you'd like is to visit atbentrepreneur.com. Always happy to have you on our newsletter so you can stay up to date and keep in touch with us. With that, we'll sign off. I hope everybody has a great day. Thank you again, Chad and Norrell, and we'll all see you again soon.
Yep. Thank you, Cliff, and thank you, everyone, for attending.
Thanks, everyone.